What happens when the last true sorcerer of heavy metal, Ronnie James Dio, draws his final breath not on stage, but in a sterile hospital room far from the thunder of applause? On May 16, 2010, at Houston's M.D. Anderson Cancer Center, the man who gave metal its voice, its horns, and its mythology succumbed to stomach cancer at 67. For millions of fans, the silence that followed wasn't just the loss of a singer, it was the end of an era, the extinguishing of the genre's most unbreakable flame. The scene was heartbreakingly ordinary for someone who had lived such an extraordinary life. No stage lights, no dragon props, no legions of devoted fans throwing horns in unison, just the quiet beeping of medical equipment and Wendy holding his hand through this final battle. The sorcerer who had conjured magic from sound waves, who had stood barely 5 feet 5 inches tall yet commanded arenas like a giant, had been reduced to whispered words and labored breathing. Yet even in that sterile hospital room there was something mythic about Dio's passing. He had fought stomach cancer with the same ruthless artistic discipline he had brought to every performance, every recording session, every creative challenge throughout his career. Until the very end, he spoke of returning to the stage, of new songs waiting to be born, of dragons yet to be slain through the power of heavy metal. The dreamer who had proclaimed "dreamers never die" was proving the truth of his own words, even as his physical form prepared to leave this realm. The news sent shockwaves through the global metal community with an intensity rarely seen in music history. Within hours, tribute concerts were being organized, devil horns were being raised in cities across the world, and Holy Diver was echoing from car stereos as fans processed the loss of their spiritual leader. This wasn't just the death of a musician, it was the severing of the last direct connection to heavy metal's mythical origins. The tributes revealed the extraordinary impact of a man whose voice had soared across 4 octaves, whose hand gesture learned from his Italian grandmother had become metal's most iconic symbol. Tony Iommi, despite years of creative tensions, called him irreplaceable. Fans shared stories of how his fantasy narratives had literally saved lives, providing hope when reality offered none. But who was the man behind the sorcerer's persona? How had Ronald James Dio from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, transformed himself into the voice that defined heavy metal's spiritual dimensions? To understand Dio's extraordinary impact and the mythology he created, we must first return to the working-class origins where a small boy first discovered that his voice could transport listeners to places they had never imagined possible. In the industrial landscape of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where working-class dreams often withered under economic necessity, Ronald James Dio was born on July 10, 1942, into an Italian-American family that valued tradition, hard work, and the kind of respect that had to be earned through character rather than circumstances. His father, Patrick, labored in multiple jobs, while his mother, Anna, maintained their modest home with fierce dedication, filling it with the sounds of Italian folk songs and church hymns that would later influence her son's understanding of music's spiritual power. Young Ronnie's first encounter with magic came not from books or movies, but from his grandmother's weathered hands. She was a woman who believed deeply in the ancient power of symbols and gestures to protect against evil forces. In her kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of traditional Italian cooking, she taught him the hand sign that would eventually become known worldwide as the devil horns. Though to her it was the Maloik, a protective gesture against the evil eye that had been passed down through generations of their family. This moment, a small boy learning protective magic from his grandmother, would prove prophetic in ways neither of them could have imagined. The gesture that began as family tradition would eventually become heavy metal's most recognizable symbol, spreading from one Italian kitchen to concert stages worldwide. But its deeper meaning, protection against evil, the power of symbols to transform reality, would remain central to everything Ronnie would create. His voice revealed itself early, stunning teachers and neighbors with its power and range. Even as a child, he could sing with four-octave precision that seemed impossible for someone so small. At church, parishioners would stop their conversations when young Ronnie's voice soared above the congregation during hymns. The contrast was already apparent. This diminutive child possessed something immense within him, a voice that could fill any space and move any heart. The transformation from sacred music to secular stardom began with the Vegas Kings, a doo-wop group formed during his high school years. These early performances taught him essential lessons about connecting with audiences, about the alchemy that occurred when voices blended in perfect harmony. More importantly, he discovered that music could transport both performer and audience to emotional territories that ordinary conversation could never reach. But doo-wop's smooth harmonies, while providing technical training, couldn't contain the growing power of Ronnie's artistic vision. As rock and roll exploded across America, he began experimenting with harder-edged material, his voice proving equally powerful when applied to more aggressive musical styles. The mythical quality that would later define his career was already emerging. He didn't just sing songs, he seemed to conjure entire worlds through sound. His early professional band, Elf, formed in 1967, represented his first serious attempt to create something genuinely original. The group's connection with Deep Purple's Roger Glover provided crucial exposure to the possibilities of heavy music when the genre was still forming its identity. But more importantly, it was during the Elf years that Ronnie began developing the storytelling approach that would become his signature. Songs that functioned as complete mythological narratives rather than simple expressions of emotion. The stage name Dio, Italian for God, emerged during this period, reflecting not megalomaniacal delusions but his growing understanding that music could serve as a conduit for transcendent experiences. The transformation from Ronnie Padavona to Ronnie James Dio was more than cosmetic. It was the conscious creation of an artistic identity dedicated to elevating heavy metal beyond mere entertainment into the realm of genuine mythology. Could these early experiences have prepared him for the extraordinary career that lay ahead? The answer was both yes and no. The technical skills, spiritual foundation, and storytelling instincts developed during these formative years would prove essential to his later success, yet nothing could have prepared him for the specific challenges of becoming heavy metal's most uncompromising mythologist. The late 1960s found Ronnie Padavona searching for his true artistic voice in a musical landscape that was changing so rapidly that established rules seemed to dissolve daily. His transition from doo-wop to rock had been successful enough to support him professionally, but he sensed that his real destiny lay in musical territories that hadn't yet been fully explored. The formation of his band Elf in 1967 represented his first serious attempt to create something genuinely original rather than simply performing existing material. Elf was a hard rock band that incorporated elements of blues, folk, and early heavy metal into a sound that was uniquely their own. Ronnie's voice was the band's obvious focal point, but he was also learning to write songs that showcased his developing philosophy about music's power to inspire and transform. The themes that would later define his solo career, heroism, individual strength, the battle between good and evil, began to emerge in Elf's material. The band's breakthrough came through their association with Deep Purple, one of the pioneering acts of heavy metal. Roger Glover, Deep Purple's bassist, heard Elf perform and was immediately struck by Ronnie's extraordinary vocal abilities. He arranged for the band to open for Deep Purple on several tours and eventually produced their albums, giving them access to professional recording facilities and industry connections that would have been impossible to achieve independently. This relationship with Deep Purple proved crucial to Ronnie's artistic development. He was exposed to the possibilities of heavy metal music when the genre was still in its formative stages, and he began to understand how his classical training and natural vocal power could be applied to this emerging form. More importantly, he learned from musicians who shared his belief that rock music could be both entertaining and meaningful, both powerful and sophisticated. The experience of touring with established acts taught Ronnie essential lessons about the demands of professional musicianship. He discovered that sustaining a career required not just talent but also incredible physical and mental stamina, the ability to perform at peak level night after night regardless of personal circumstances. His small stature became an advantage rather than a limitation, as he learned to project energy and authority through vocal power and stage presence rather than physical intimidation. It was during this period that Ronnie began developing the mystical persona that would later become central to his artistic identity. He studied mythology, fantasy literature, and various spiritual traditions, looking for ways to incorporate these elements into his music without reducing them to mere theatrical effects. His goal was to create songs that functioned as genuine myths, stories that could provide listeners with both entertainment and insight into fundamental human experiences. The transition from Ronnie Padavona to Ronnie James Dio occurred during these years, as he adopted a stage name that reflected both his Italian heritage and his growing interest in the mystical dimensions of music. Dio, Italian for God, was chosen not out of megalomaniacal delusions but as a reflection of his belief that music could serve as a conduit for transcendent experiences. The call that would transform Dio from talented but relatively unknown vocalist to international metal icon came in 1975 when Ritchie Blackmore, Deep Purple's legendary guitarist, decided to leave the band to form Rainbow. Blackmore had been impressed by Dio's work with Elf and invited him to become Rainbow's lead singer, an opportunity that would provide him with the platform he needed to reach a global audience. Rainbow represented the perfect synthesis of Blackmore's innovative guitar work and Dio's mythical vocal approach. Their collaboration produced some of the most influential heavy metal albums of the 1970s, including Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow and Rising, which featured epic compositions that told complete stories within single songs. Dio's lyrics for Rainbow began to establish the fantasy themes that would become his trademark, while his vocal performances demonstrated a range and power that set new standards for heavy metal singers. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? For Dio, the Rainbow years provided essential experience and exposure, but they also introduced him to the creative tensions and ego conflicts that would plague many of his professional relationships. His artistic vision sometimes clashed with Blackmore's more commercial instincts, creating friction that would eventually lead to his departure from the band. The period following Dio's departure from Rainbow in 1979 represented both a crisis and an opportunity. He was now recognized as one of metal's premier vocalists, but he needed to find a new musical home that would allow him to fully realize his artistic vision. The call from Black Sabbath came at exactly the right moment, offering him the chance to revitalize one of metal's most important bands while establishing himself as more than just a talented sideman. Black Sabbath in 1979 was a band in crisis. Ozzy Osbourne's departure had left them without their iconic frontman, and many questioned whether they could survive such a fundamental change. The decision to recruit Dio was both inspired and risky. Inspired because his vocal abilities were clearly superior to most available alternatives. Risky because his style was so different from Ozzy's that it would fundamentally alter the band's identity. The Heaven and Hell album, released in 1980, proved that the gamble had paid off spectacularly. Dio's contribution to Black Sabbath represented more than simply replacing their previous singer. He had helped them create their most sophisticated and musically complex work to date. His lyrics brought new dimensions of storytelling and mythology to the band's sound, while his vocal performances demonstrated a technical proficiency that impressed even longtime skeptics. The success of Heaven and Hell established Dio as more than just a replacement. He had become an essential creative force within one of metal's most important bands. His ability to write complete narrative songs that functioned as mini-operas elevated Black Sabbath's music to new artistic heights, while his stage presence brought theatrical elements that enhanced their live performances without descending into mere spectacle. However, the very success that should have cemented Dio's place in Black Sabbath instead led to the creative tensions that would ultimately drive him away. His artistic ambitions sometimes conflicted with other band members' preferences, and the question of creative control became a source of ongoing friction. More fundamentally, Dio was beginning to understand that his artistic vision was large enough to support a band built entirely around his ideas rather than requiring him to adapt to someone else's established format. The decision to leave Black Sabbath and form his own band represented the ultimate expression of Dio's artistic confidence. He was walking away from guaranteed commercial success and industry recognition to pursue a vision that existed only in his imagination. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward of finally being able to create music that fully expressed his understanding of heavy metal's mythical possibilities. Behind all that success, was there an unbearable pressure that nobody saw? For Dio, the pressure came not from external expectations, but from his own perfectionist standards and his belief that heavy metal could and should be something more than mere entertainment. His commitment to artistic integrity would drive him to extraordinary achievements, but it would also create personal costs that would accumulate over the decades. The formation of Dio's solo band in 1982 represented the culmination of everything he had learned about music, mythology, and the power of heavy metal to transform both performers and audiences. Finally free to pursue his artistic vision without compromise, he assembled a group of musicians who shared his commitment to both technical excellence and spiritual authenticity. The result was Holy Diver, an album that would establish him as one of metal's most important solo artists, while defining the sound and themes that would influence countless musicians for decades to come. Holy Diver was more than an album. It was a statement of artistic philosophy that demonstrated how heavy metal could function as genuine mythology for the modern world. Each song told complete stories that operated simultaneously as entertainment and spiritual allegory, while Dio's vocal performances reached new heights of power and emotional expression. The title track became an instant classic, its narrative of underwater mysticism and personal transformation, resonating with listeners who were hungry for music that acknowledged life's deeper mysteries. The album's success exceeded all expectations, both commercially and critically. Holy Diver proved that heavy metal audiences were ready for sophisticated storytelling and complex musical arrangements, and that Dio's vision of the genre's possibilities had been neither naive nor commercially unrealistic. He had created music that was both accessible and profound, both entertaining and meaningful. The tour supporting Holy Diver revealed Dio's extraordinary abilities as a live performer. His concerts became theatrical experiences that transported audiences into the mythical realms described in his songs, complete with elaborate stage sets, costume changes, and dramatic lighting effects. Yet these productions never felt artificial or calculated. Dio's genuine belief in his material was evident in every gesture, every vocal phrase, every interaction with the audience. His stage presence was particularly remarkable given his physical stature. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches tall, Dio could easily have been dwarfed by the massive stages and elaborate productions that define 1980s metal concerts. Instead, he commanded these spaces through sheer force of personality and vocal power, proving that true stage presence had nothing to do with physical intimidation and everything to do with spiritual authority. The success of Holy Diver established Dio as one of metal's elite performers, but it also created expectations that would prove increasingly difficult to meet. Each subsequent album was measured against this masterpiece, and while many contained exceptional individual songs, none quite captured the complete artistic vision that had made Holy Diver so special. This pattern would become a source of ongoing frustration for Dio, who understood that he had achieved something extraordinary but struggled to repeat it consistently. The pressure to maintain his artistic standards while satisfying commercial expectations created tensions that affected both his creative process and his personal relationships. Band members came and went as Dio searched for collaborators who could match his commitment to excellence, while record label executives pushed for material that would replicate the success of his breakthrough album. These external pressures were compounded by his own perfectionist tendencies, which made him increasingly critical of his work and dissatisfied with anything less than complete artistic success. The 1980s also brought personal challenges that complicated Dio's professional achievements. His marriage to his first wife ended during this period, partly due to the demands of his career, but also because of the emotional distance that his artistic obsessions created in his personal relationships. The divorce was painful and expensive, forcing him to confront the reality that success in one area of life didn't guarantee happiness in others. His relationship with Wendy, who would become his second wife and closest collaborator, began during this turbulent period. She understood both his artistic vision and the personal costs of pursuing it, providing him with emotional support and practical assistance that proved essential to his continued success. Her background in the music industry made her an ideal partner for someone whose life was entirely consumed by creative pursuits. Did this period of success mark their creative peak? Or was it simply the beginning of a longer artistic journey? For Dio, the Holy Diver era represented both the fulfillment of his artistic vision and the establishment of standards that would challenge him for the rest of his career. He had proven that his approach to heavy metal could achieve both commercial success and critical respect, but he had also created expectations that would prove increasingly difficult to meet. The late 1980s and early 1990s represented a period of artistic consolidation for Dio, as he worked to build upon the foundation established by Holy Diver, while adapting to significant changes in the heavy metal landscape. The rise of thrash metal, the emergence of alternative rock, and the increasing commercialization of the music industry created challenges that required him to evolve his approach, without abandoning the core elements that had made him successful. Albums like The Last in Line and Sacred Heart demonstrated Dio's ability to maintain his artistic vision while incorporating new musical elements and production techniques. These records contained some of his most sophisticated songwriting and featured increasingly complex arrangements that showcased both his vocal abilities and his band's musical skills. Yet they also revealed the ongoing struggle between his perfectionist tendencies and the practical demands of maintaining a recording and touring career. The period was marked by frequent lineup changes as Dio searched for musicians who could match his commitment to artistic excellence. His reputation as a demanding perfectionist made him difficult to work with for some musicians, while others found his artistic vision inspiring and challenging. The constant personnel changes created inconsistencies in his recorded output, but they also demonstrated his refusal to compromise his standards for the sake of stability. His live performances during this period reached new heights of theatrical sophistication. The stage productions became increasingly elaborate, featuring props, costumes, and special effects that enhanced the mythical qualities of his music. These concerts were genuine spectacles that provided audiences with complete escape from ordinary reality, yet they were always grounded in Dio's sincere belief in the material he was performing. The financial costs of these productions were enormous, often consuming most of the profits from his tours and album sales. Record label executives frequently questioned the commercial wisdom of such elaborate staging. but Dio considered these theatrical elements essential to his artistic vision. He believed that his audiences deserved complete artistic experiences rather than simple musical performances, and he was willing to sacrifice financial gain to provide them. The changing musical landscape of the 1990s presented new challenges for Dio and other metal veterans. The rise of grunge and alternative rock temporarily diminished mainstream interest in heavy metal, while the emergence of extreme metal subgenres created new expectations for heaviness and aggression that didn't align with Dio's more melodic approach. He found himself caught between younger fans who wanted heavier material and older fans who preferred his classic style. Rather than attempting to chase musical trends, Dio chose to focus on perfecting his established approach while gradually incorporating elements that reflected his evolving artistic vision. This strategy maintained his core audience while preventing the kind of dramatic stylistic changes that had damaged other metal veterans' careers. Yet it also limited his ability to attract new listeners who associated heavy metal with more extreme forms of expression. His reunion with Black Sabbath for the Dehumanizer album in 1992 provided a welcome respite from the challenges of maintaining a solo career. The collaboration demonstrated that his creative chemistry with Tony Iommi remained strong, and the resulting album was widely considered one of the band's strongest efforts since his original departure. However, the reunion was short-lived, ending due to the same creative tensions that had caused problems during his first tenure with the band. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their greatest achievements? For Dio, the success of Holy Diver and his early work with Black Sabbath created both opportunities and limitations that would define the rest of his career. While these achievements guaranteed him a place in metal history, they also established expectations that made it difficult for critics and fans to evaluate his later work on its own merits. The final 2 decades of Dio's life and career were marked by a remarkable consistency of vision and an unwavering commitment to the artistic principles that had guided him from the beginning. As the heavy metal scene continued to fragment and evolve around him, he remained dedicated to the mythical storytelling approach that had made him unique, refusing to compromise his vision for commercial advantage or critical approval. His later albums, including Magica and Master of the Moon, represented mature statements from an artist who had found peace with his role as heavy metal's premier mythologist. These records featured sophisticated songwriting that demonstrated his continued growth as a composer, while his vocal performances proved that age had not diminished his technical abilities. The concept album, Magica, was particularly ambitious, telling a complete fantasy story across multiple songs, while incorporating musical themes that unified the entire work. The touring for these albums revealed that Dio's live performances had lost none of their power or authenticity. His concerts continued to be transformative experiences for audiences who were hungry for music that acknowledged life's spiritual dimensions. The elaborate stage productions became even more sophisticated, incorporating video elements and advanced lighting systems that enhanced the mythical qualities of his music without overwhelming the essential human connection between performer and audience. His relationship with younger metal musicians during this period was particularly gratifying. Many of the genre's most successful performers cited Dio as a primary influence, and he found genuine satisfaction in mentoring emerging artists who shared his commitment to artistic integrity. These relationships provided him with validation that his approach to heavy metal had created lasting value rather than simply temporary entertainment. The formation of Heaven and Hell in 2006, reuniting him with his Black Sabbath bandmates under a different name, represented a creative renaissance that surprised even longtime supporters. The band's performances and their album The Devil You Know demonstrated that the chemistry between Dio and Tony Iommi had not only survived their previous conflicts, but had actually deepened with maturity. the project proved that their best work together was not limited to their 1980s collaborations. Yet even as his professional life reached new heights of satisfaction, Dio was beginning to experience the health problems that would ultimately end his career. The demands of decades of intensive touring and recording had taken a toll on his physical condition, while the stress of maintaining perfectionist standards had created ongoing tension that affected his overall well-being. His commitment to his craft had always required significant personal sacrifice, but the costs were becoming increasingly apparent. The diagnosis of stomach cancer in late 2009 came as a shock to both Dio and his fans. He had always maintained excellent physical condition and had never exhibited the self-destructive behaviors that had affected many of his contemporaries. The disease seemed particularly cruel given his disciplined lifestyle and his ongoing creative vitality, striking down a man who had much more to offer the world. His response to the diagnosis was characteristic of his approach to every other challenge in his life. He immediately began researching treatment options, consulting with the best medical specialists, and developing strategies for fighting the disease while continuing his musical activities as much as possible. Even as he underwent chemotherapy, he spoke optimistically about returning to the stage and recording new material. The final months of his life were marked by both tremendous suffering and remarkable courage. The treatments were brutal and debilitating, yet he continued to work on musical projects and maintain correspondence with fans around the world. His determination to continue creating music even while fighting for his life demonstrated the depth of his commitment to his artistic calling. Were these final years marked by acceptance or continued struggle against limitations? For Dio, there was no real distinction between the two. He had always believed that true success required fighting for your dreams regardless of obstacles, and his battle against cancer was simply the ultimate expression of that philosophy. The morning when Ronnie James Dio passed away in Houston marked the end of an era in heavy metal history. But it also began a process of evaluation and remembrance that revealed the extraordinary scope of his influence on both the genre and the broader culture. His death was not just the loss of a talented performer, it was the severing of the last direct connection to heavy metal's mythical origins and spiritual ambitions. The immediate response to news of his death was unprecedented in the metal community. Tribute concerts were organized within hours, with musicians from every subgenre and generation coming together to honor his memory. The diversity of these tributes, ranging from classical orchestras performing his songs to extreme metal bands covering his material, demonstrated the universal respect he had earned throughout the musical world. The investigation of his final months revealed a man who had faced terminal illness with the same courage and determination that had characterized his entire career. Medical staff at MD Anderson Cancer Center spoke of his positive attitude and his concern for other patients, describing how he had used his remaining time to encourage fellow cancer fighters and provide them with hope. Even in his final battle, he had remained committed to the inspiring message that had defined his music. The contents of his personal effects told the story of a life lived with remarkable consistency between public persona and private beliefs. His home was filled with books on mythology, fantasy literature, and spiritual traditions from around the world, revealing the serious scholarship that had informed his songwriting. Collections of fan letters dating back decades showed the ongoing correspondence he had maintained with supporters who had found genuine meaning in his music. Perhaps most touching were the unfinished musical projects discovered among his possessions. Even during his final illness, he had continued working on new songs and concepts, driven by a creative urge that not even terminal cancer could diminish. These fragments provided insight into the ongoing evolution of his artistic vision and suggested directions his music might have taken had he survived. The funeral drew mourners from around the world, including metal luminaries, industry professionals, and thousands of fans who had traveled great distances to pay their respects. The ceremony balanced celebration of his achievements with acknowledgement of the profound loss his death represented. Speakers emphasized not just his musical contributions but his character, his integrity, and his genuine care for the people whose lives his music had touched. Media coverage of his death revealed the extent to which he had transcended the heavy metal genre to become a cultural figure of broader significance. Mainstream publications that had often dismissed metal as juvenile or insignificant found themselves acknowledging Dio's artistic sophistication and cultural impact. The devil horns gesture he had popularized was recognized as one of popular culture's most enduring symbols, crossing generational and musical boundaries. The establishment of the Ronnie James Dio Stand Up and Shout Cancer Fund by his widow Wendy ensured that his legacy would include ongoing efforts to combat the disease that had taken his life. The organization's work in funding cancer research and supporting patients demonstrated that his inspiring message had extended beyond entertainment to create genuine positive change in the world. Was their death as peaceful as it appeared? Or did they carry regrets about work left unfinished? All evidence suggested that Dio had found genuine satisfaction in his life's work and had faced his final challenge with the same courage he had brought to everything else. His last conversations focused on gratitude for the career he had enjoyed and optimism about the ongoing influence of his music. What hidden secrets might still remain untold about the man behind the mythical persona? In Dio's case, the most remarkable secret was how completely the public image aligned with private reality. Unlike many performers who adopted personas that differed dramatically from their authentic selves, Dio had lived according to the same principles of integrity and spiritual seeking that had informed his music. The enduring mystery of Ronnie James Dio lies not in the gap between image and reality, but in his ability to maintain such consistency of vision throughout a career that spanned multiple decades and dramatic changes in the musical landscape. His story challenges the assumption that artistic integrity must be compromised for commercial success, demonstrating instead that authenticity can be both creatively and financially rewarding. Today, more than a decade after his death, Dio's influence continues to grow rather than diminish. New generations discover his music and find inspiration in both his artistic vision and his personal example of unyielding standards. The themes he explored, heroism, individual strength, the battle between good and evil, remain as relevant today as they were when he first began incorporating them into his songs. His legacy exists in multiple forms that reflect the different aspects of his extraordinary life and career. For metal musicians, he remains the gold standard for vocal technique and stage presence. For songwriters, his ability to create complete mythological narratives within popular song structures continues to inspire efforts to elevate the genre's literary dimensions. The Ronnie James Dio Stand Up and Shout Cancer Fund, established by Wendy in 2010, ensures his inspiring message extends beyond entertainment to create genuine positive change. Perhaps most importantly, for anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by life's challenges, Dio's music continues to provide the same message of empowerment that he spent his entire career perfecting. His songs remain anthems for the misunderstood, the struggling, and the dreamers who refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. The contrast between his physical stature, just 5 feet 5 inches, and his gigantic artistic presence provides the perfect metaphor for his entire career. At the legendary 1983 Holy Diver concert at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, fans watched in amazement as this diminutive figure commanded a massive stage complete with dragon props and castle battlements, his voice soaring over thunderous music with supernatural power. The visual was stunning, a small man creating enormous magic through sheer force of artistic will. In an era when heavy metal has fragmented into countless subgenres, Dio's example provides a unifying vision that transcends stylistic differences. His commitment to using metal as a vehicle for inspiration rather than merely aggression offers a model for how the genre can evolve while maintaining its essential power to transform lives. The boy who learned protective gestures from his Italian grandmother grew up to become one of popular culture's most powerful symbols of strength and spiritual resistance. The transformation from Ronald James Padavona to Ronnie James Dio represented more than a change of name. It was the conscious creation of an artistic identity dedicated to helping others find their own inner strength. When fans around the world simultaneously raised their horns on the night of his death, creating an impromptu global communion of grief and celebration, they proved that his prophecy had come true. Dreamers never die. They transform into something larger than their physical forms, becoming eternal voices that speak to every generation facing its own dragons. Ronnie James Dio proved that in heavy metal the body may die, but the dreamer's voice, holy, defiant, eternal, never will. Has Dio's commitment to artistic integrity over commercial compromise become a realistic model for artists in our streaming and social media age? Which moment in his catalog best proves that dreamers never die? In metal's pantheon of immortal voices, alongside Ozzy, Bruce Dickinson, and Rob Halford, where does Dio's unique contribution to the genre's mythology place him in history? And how can future generations honor his legacy while creating something genuinely new from the mythical foundation he established? The answers may vary depending on one's values and priorities, but Dio's own satisfaction with his choices suggests that he had found something more valuable than maximum commercial success. The knowledge that he had remained true to his deepest beliefs while creating art that genuinely helped others transcend their limitations and discover their own infinite potential.